Hello and welcome to the Josh and Tyler Show. I'm Josh of Josh and Tyler. Tyler will be on in just a moment, but today we are talking best pictures. Good, bad, nominated, ones that won more specifically, very, very specifically. Now, this was an interesting list for me because there's a lot of best pictures, a lot of films that I thought would have been nominated won, but apparently that is not the case. Tyler, how you doing?
What's going on, guys? I'm Tyler, and there is no perfect movie. It doesn't even matter if the movie wins Best Picture, you're gonna still have a ton of people on the internet the very next day bitching and moaning about how their favorite movie deserved to win it more, and it goes on and on and on. But enough about Twitter, because Josh and I today are gonna count down our top 10 favorite movies to win Best Picture at the Oscars, which was a surprisingly easier list to make than any of the ones that I've done on this particular channel. I had 9 out of 10 within like the first hour that Josh suggested that we actually do this list. And I only had to rewatch one older classic in order to make sure that I was definitely right about putting it on the list to begin with. And because the ranking in order goes again back and forth every single time I think about it, I'm actually going to do something a little bit different. For this list, I'm going to rank the 9 movies that I think are up to par with each other by order of which year they won the Oscar, and I'm going to save my absolute favorite because that was the one that I had locked down. I'm going to save my absolute favorite for last. So, with that said, let's get into the top 10 Best Picture Academy Award winners.
Coming in at my number 10, Tyler, you're doing non-specific numbers. I'm going to do numbers because I decided to rank them and file them. Is 1951's American in Paris. Now, for me, American in Paris is not my favorite Gene Kelly movie. I do enjoy this movie very much, large singing and dancing sequences, but there's something that's a little surprise to me. Gene Kelly was nominated Best Picture, so the Best Picture. I'm a huge Gene Kelly fan. Um, Singing in the Rain was not nominated for Best Picture. That's a little bit concerning to me because let's just take a look at 1952. Let's see what they nominated in 1952. The Greatest Show on Earth. High Noon, fair enough. The original Moulin Rouge, The Quiet Man, and Ivanhoe. This is severely missing Singing in the Rain. So for me, I'm going to put American Paris up in here because I do think Gene Kelly doesn't get a lot of Oscar consideration. He was nominated in 40. The Anchors Away, which is a pretty decent Gene Kelly film, was nominated in 45. But there's no nomination for Singing in the Rain, and that's concerning as it's gone down as one of the best films musicals. I would say it's probably the greatest musical of all time because I can't think of any musical that I enjoy watching more. I'm a huge fan of Gene Kelly's dancing in this, and in American in Paris, he plays a painter in Paris who has a parallel story with a pianist who's friends with a famous singer and such. And it's not a very complicated story, but it's a very interesting story, outlined by large singing and dancing sequences and bright colors. I love this movie. I've watched it a couple times. It's not one that I super want, but my brain is confused. You did nominate Singing in the Rain for Best Picture? You're like, haha, we should nominate The Greatest Frickin' Showman. Have y'all seen that? Do you like the circus? No, I'm serious. Do you like the circus? This is a very serious question. The circus. This is a 3-hour circus movie. In case you've never been to a circus or never heard of an actual circus, it is void of story, and I like Cecil B. DeMille, but this is not good. This should not have won Best Picture. It is a double VHS that is a waste of your time. A double Laserdisc that is boring that you should crack in half. I don't understand. They should have nominated freaking Singing in the Rain. Anyway, so that's why I got American in Paris on here. It's fun. It's Gene Kelly. And seriously, y'all should have Singing in the Rain on here. The Academy is fucked up.
At number 10, the Best Picture winner for 1961, we have West Side Story. filled with elaborate and high energy choreography that is brought to life beautifully by the lead performers, that visually portrays the turf war, Oscar winning performances from Rita Moreno and George Chakiris, and very catchy and memorable songs from Stephen Sondheim and Leonard Bernstein that carry a wide range of emotions that the characters are going through. West Side Story takes a classic tale, in this case Romeo and Juliet, and weaves in social commentary that is still relevant today, themes of the consequences of hatred that are told in a much more honest and uncompromising way than most modern movies or TV shows cover. Specifically because no character in this movie, and I mean no character whatsoever, is ever let off the hook for their actions and the consequences of the hatred that they pass on in their community. It doesn't matter who has more power than the next. Every single character in this movie has a certain level of prejudice towards someone, and they're given a fleshed out motivation for doing so that makes you understand what they're going through. But at the end of the day, it's still their fault that they're using what little or how much power they have to hurt others and themselves, and that's the reason that hatred within various different groups continues to live on forever. It's something that 60 years later people still can't fucking figure out, which just makes this even a more passionate choice on this list. Now, admittedly, the relationship between Tony and Maria is the least interesting aspect, which is weird for a Romeo and Juliet adaptation, and Tony himself is so wide-eyed and optimistic in a way that feels so exaggerated and phoned in that his optimistic nature on how he's going to fix things when it's clearly not going to go that way just makes him come across as being really stupid. But it doesn't change the fact that the positive elements in West Side Story are just way too good to ignore. It's the rare musical that makes you think about difficult subject matter in a really fun and exciting way.
Coming into my number 9 for winning Best Oscar Picture things is I wanted to put a Clint Eastwood movie on here, so I put Million Dollar Baby. Now, Million Dollar Baby is a very, very interesting and fascinating look into the world of boxing. It also doesn't hurt, but it helps greatly. Now we have Morgan Freeman and Clint Eastwood as the supporting cast, or I guess co-leads in this, along with Hilary Swank. For me, I've never been a huge Hilary Swank fan, but I think she does a really good job in this movie. But this movie, the draw for me is 100% Clint Eastwood and Morgan Freeman. And the boxing. Yeah. I like this movie. It's tragic. I guess I have to spoil it now. So Hilary Swank wants to be a boxer, but Clint Eastwood won't train her because of that she's a girl. That is clearly displayed in the movie over and over again, sort of like the Get Off My Lawn and Gran Torino there. So he won't train her. Morgan Freeman starts training her, and eventually she becomes a reluctant friend to Clint Eastwood, and they start boxing. Now her family comes around and they're like, well, you shouldn't do this and that, and your mom doesn't approve of this and that and such, and they want money and yada yada yada, and there's these very emotional family scenes of you haven't been around for me sort of thing, why should I help you now? And there is a tragic ending to this film for those of you who know it. I won't say it on here if you haven't seen Million Dollar Baby, because it's definitely worth a watch. Clint Eastwood gets to really be Clint Eastwood. But that's not the way it goes. So this is my Clint Eastwood nomination on here, because I like Clint Eastwood films, and I think that I think the Best Picture win is something he needs under his belt.
At number 9, the Best Picture winner of 1965, keeping up with the musical terms, we are going with The Sound of Music. The story of a teacher being accepted into a dysfunctional family is something that Julie Andrews had done the year before Sound of Music and had gotten her Oscar for that exact reason. But despite the similarity between Mary Poppins and Maria von Trapp on that end, The Sound of Music still covers new territory by focusing on a much more grounded story about a family struggling to cope with grief and adapt to their new situation, both figuratively and literally, with the rise of Nazi power in World War II Austria. Robert Wise's direction is absolutely stunning. He creates such a beautiful, large-scale, colorful atmosphere that makes Vienna and Austria in general look absolutely marvelous. And he proves from his experience with West Side Story, because he co-directed that too, that he can film very fun and whimsical musical numbers without elaborate choreography, just by using shot sizes, the incredible music from Rodgers and Hammerstein, and of course the actors who all have really talented singing voices. Even though, again, Julie Andrews is covering familiar territory over the course of a couple years, she still brings a lot of new elements to the table as Maria von Trapp, because as opposed to being this whimsical teacher in a mysterious way, she herself has an arc where she has to mature from being a disobedient student of the church to this brutally honest but still very welcoming and warm teacher who is very upfront in her intentions and is never confrontational to this family unless she absolutely has to be when it comes to encouraging the captain and his children to come out of their shells and be much more upfront about the pain that they're struggling with. And almost 3 hours long, the only parts that really drag about The Sound of Music are the love triangle sequences, which I'm convinced were cliched and predictable even at that point. But there's absolutely never a dull moment outside of that with The Sound of Music. In my opinion, it's the best musical to ever win Best Picture.
Coming in number eight on my best picture list. Yeah, that was just a stutter because of my dyslexia. But moving on, we have Gladiator. Gladiator won Best Picture for Ridley Scott, starring one of my favorite actors, and not everyone's favorite actor. I don't know, I just like this man, except when he's singing in Les Mis. That's weird. I don't know if Russell Crowe can sing. But they sure did find out, didn't they? Russell Crowe plays a commander in an army and eventually gets sold into slavery, becoming a gladiator. That's 100% oversimplifying it. Now, the draw to this movie for the Oscars is definitely the historical aspect, but the draw to me is the cool gladiator fights. This also has Joaquin Phoenix literally obliterating his role and acting great. I don't know what to call it, method or whatever, but this man is wonderful as the emperor in this film, basically watching all these people die and such. We get to see the Roman Colosseum, and as a huge history buff, this is a very exciting movie. Is it accurate? No, but it's really, really, really cool because I love gladiator movies. Spartacus was not a Best Picture winner, or it would be on this list because I freaking love Spartacus with Kirk Douglas there. That's a fantastic, fantastic movie. But for me, I love a good gladiator. I love some good sword and sandal movies that they're qualified as. And this movie delivers from beginning to end. It's not overly long, which is nice. I think it's just over 2 hours. But the fights are great. You got and this one, again, borrows very, 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 very much from Spartacus in its tone and style. But regardless, it really makes it its own. And unless you love older films like I do, this list has a few older films on it. You're not going to think, maybe this update isn't as good as the older film, because not a lot of people went and saw the original Spartacus. People didn't see the original 300 Spartans, which is also the same sort of similar type of story in here, which is a very interesting Greek war piece as well. Now, this film has some really great war set pieces, some great action set pieces, and just some really well-rounded dialogue, incredible lighting. A lot of movies I don't really note for lighting, but this one really it takes advantage of its natural or artificial lighting that they basically to impose to create this world to come alive. So that's why Gladiator is my number 8.
At number 8, the Best Picture winner of 1973, The Sting. Where's my wallet? Now, as opposed to most modern-day caper movies that are filled with a ton of expository monologues from bland, forgettable characters in order to justify how their scheme is supposedly not implausible in the slightest, and so many twists and turns that just come out of left field altogether, The Sting is the rare caper movie that feels very grounded. It feels dark, but still upbeat. It's very much a comedy thriller, one of the few comedies that have actually won Best Picture, if any to begin with, that gets the overly complicated explanations and the side characters whose names you forget the second they're introduced. They get that stuff out of the way in the first act and spend the rest of the movie on what makes it absolutely fantastic to watch. The dynamic between Robert Redford and Paul Newman is great. They have excellent chemistry with each other. The overall strategy of being able to predict what a mark is going to do in a given moment and when's the right time to make their move, and more importantly, the performance within the performance, that really does make the acting much more impressive. Robert Shaw and Charles Durning are great love-to-hate villains. You feel absolutely nothing for them. Even though they're not very complicated, they still have very identifiable motives that make them intimidating enough villains. And the ragtime score was absolutely stunning. It was whimsical, it was playful. It really puts you into the Depression era setting without ever overemphasizing the darker nature of the movie. The darker nature of the movie comes from George Roy Hill's very old school direction that comes across as a film noir, with the way that there are constantly shadows surrounding each and every single character as they're making their certain moves, making sure that nobody else is following them, and if so, what's their next strategy without resorting to violence that can get them into even bigger trouble. There are some twists and turns that are completely predictable, and the movie's not as dark as it could have been, because there are a lot of lighthearted moments that are emphasized with the bright colors of the costume design and the set design, but this is the rare caper movie that is so character driven and is so straightforward, because the overall con was actually ridiculously easy to follow, that whenever there's a predictable twist or whenever it's a little too lighthearted and not serious enough, you honestly don't care, because you love these two main characters and you desperately want them to succeed. Every time they succeeded at their con, I was smiling, I was laughing. Those were all the emotions that I should have felt.
Coming in at number 7 on my list of Oscar winners, I'm going to put a more recent film, and because it's more recent, that's why I'm going to put it lower. And part of me, I feel out of breath today. Don't know why. Very odd, very strange. Regardless, number 7 is Green Book. Now, this is the story about Dr. Shirley, a musician traveling around with Viggo Mortensen, going from place to place, being friendly, overcoming racism, and basically just being good pals at points. Now, this movie for me is one of those movies that's very divisive. When I work at my cinema, my other staff members look at me and they're like, you know what should have won Best Picture? The Favorite. I'm like, fuck The Favorite. Fuck Yorgos and his stupid vision. I think it has great performances, but I think Yorgos is just here to fuck with my mind, and I don't appreciate that. Take out the freaking psychedelic rabbits. Take out the weirdness at the end of every single one of your movies. The last 10 minutes of your movies are crap, Yorgos. Other than that, you make good movies. So the Green Book won. I was very happy. We got into a debate, and I don't know. This guy was like, but seriously, I do not like Yorgos as a director. I appreciate your creativity, but please stay off of my Oscar-nominated screens. And I don't know, make less. They're not baked on Greek mythology. That's bullshit. Anyway, back to Green Book. I really like Green Book. This is a character piece, through and through. So from beginning to end, we really get to see a lot of these fun character moments, whether it's the KFC moment, whether it's Viggo Mortensen standing up for his friend, or simply the letter writing. But there is a lot of charming scenes with the music. The way the music is composed and presented in this film really adds a character and an element to itself. And I just love the scene where they're not allowed to eat in a certain restaurant, and they just go to a jazz club and they start playing the music, and I'm just like, this is so nice. And it's also a freaking Christmas movie. Did I mention that? Yeah, it's a Christmas movie. They got to make it home in time for Christmas. It's real nice. I like it. I know y'all like The Favorite more. I don't know what you're smoking, but that movie is crap.
At number 7, the Best Picture winner of 1991, The Silence of the Lambs. It's not the exact same thing, I know, but still. Back when the Oscars actually considered the possibility that genre films would be up to par with social dramas that covered real issues, The Silence of the Lambs is the rare psychological horror movie that doesn't overly rely on jump scares, loud bursts of music, or very jarring cuts of grotesque imagery in order to scare us. They do feature those techniques, and they're done in a much more respectful way that modern day horror movies should really think about rewatching this movie, learning those techniques, and just deciding, you know what? maybe we've been doing this wrong. Maybe we've been treating audiences too stupid. Nah, let's just throw in more jump scares, more false alarms. Shit like that. But easily, without question, the main thing that is so startling about The Silence of the Lambs is the very complicated cat and mouse game between Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter. Anthony Hopkins earns his Oscar every minute that he's on screen. He is so over the top in his line delivery, his facial expressions, and his very stilted posture. But he does it in a way that actually does feel natural and still very haunting. You are glued to the screen every time he is on camera, and his switch from being charming and persuasive to being absolutely grotesque is done flawlessly. It makes sense why he came back to do Hannibal and Red Dragon, even though they weren't up to par with The Silence of the Lambs. He still made those movies absolutely watchable. And Jodie Foster is also really good at capturing Clarice's struggle to hide her fear towards him, and in order to stand her ground, in order to get information out of him that she desperately needs, information that could save a lot of lives and catch this one serial killer, Buffalo Bill. Which, I will say this, Ted Levine is a little too over the top as Buffalo Bill, and surprisingly nowhere near as intimidating as Lecter, which one would think, considering Lecter spends most of the movie in prison. It doesn't really change the fact that it does not only serve as a great suspense horror movie, proof that horror movies can be up to par with Best Picture winners, it also does a really good job of putting in some social commentary about the struggle that Clarice is going through in a male-dominated profession. And Jonathan Levine uses very specific POV shots whenever she's surrounded by men who never take her seriously, especially during the final act where she's all alone in the dark with Buffalo Bill. It's not the most suspenseful scene, but that shot in particular with the night vision goggles sums up the entire message of the film perfectly.
Coming in my number 6, I have a little bit of an unusual pick here because I usually wouldn't put a movie like this so high up on the list, but I think this is a very significant film for its time and still really relevant today. I'm going back, way back to 1931. This is actually one of the first war movies I ever saw in completion that wasn't on TV. I bought this on VHS from a thrift store when I was about 9 years old with my VHS and I had a VHS player with a built-in TV, and I watched all Quiet on the Western Front. And I did not think that I would care that much because I had watched quite a few other black and white movies as well, but this one really struck a chord with me, and to this day, I still absolutely love this movie from beginning to end. We follow a group of characters as they go into World War I and they're fighting in the trenches. Now, obviously, this movie's a little bit dated, but for the time, this would have been incredible for the special effects and the set they created with the explosions and the gunfire and the blood, and even the blood looks a little better than some 80s action movies. But it basically is a film about moral choices, about thinking, why are they the enemy? Why are they this? Why are we fighting? And it's a war movie while being an anti-war movie at the same time. And we get to the big climax of the movie, which for most movies would be like, well, this is a character moment, where he's lying injured in a pit where there's an explosion previously. There's bodies around him. And he's lying there with a German soldier, and he's an American soldier. And he has to choose to talk to this man and understand this man. And it's this really interesting clash of idealisms and everything. And I love it. I love this movie. I just think it's really interesting to have a war movie that's an anti-war movie while being a war movie. And it won freaking Best Picture. One day I will get the Criterion, but it's very expensive.
And number 6, the Best Picture winner of 1992, Unforgiven. Clint Eastwood takes decades of experience as a Western icon to make possibly his best Western movie ever, because it demystifies certain tropes of the genre that we have grown to love, namely the portrayal of violence. William Money is not just a tough-as-nails cowboy who's willing to go through anyone and anything in order to survive. He spends every waking minute of his life thinking about the people that he's hurt, no matter how quick or how brutal he did it. It's an action that he can't take back, and he knows that if he steps back into his previous life, it'll lead to more death and destruction, which is why it really pains him to take on one final bounty that'll raise enough money to protect his farm. The direction does make the shootouts feel very exciting because the victims are people who are very unsympathetic at first because they have either escaped justice or are unwilling to provide justice, especially Gene Hackman, who is excellent at portraying a man who prides himself as being a pacifist, nonviolent sheriff who beats the shit out of people for carrying guns into his town, let alone actually using them. But the script does have a clever way of making a clever way of challenging us as an audience for actually enjoying watching people die. Because even though these guys are assholes, when they get fatally shot, once they realize they're going to die a slow, painful death without any loved ones, they start to do the stuff that we are afraid of facing when our time comes. And that's the stuff that really haunts Money the most. It doesn't matter why he killed them. It doesn't matter whether or not they deserved it. What matters is that he committed such a crime. It proves that he is just as bad as the people that he is setting out to hunt. There are no good guys in Unforgiven, just those who survive.
Coming to my number 5 on the best of the Oscar picks is... Oh, yeah, I got a piece of paper that says things right here. I hope y'all didn't see that in the quick flash of the video. The King's Speech. The King's Speech won for 2010 there. I really, really like this movie. It's about the king, or the prince at the time, getting over a speech impediment and making a friend. And Geoffrey Rush and Colin Firth... Is it Colin Firth, I think. Yes. My brain is blanking, because it's not Farrell. It should be Firth. That's it. That's the one. Names are hard. Regardless, this movie is simply about learning to talk and learning to trust. And it gives me Good Will Hunting vibes. In the way it's concepted, where they have this guy who has a place of authority or has a place who's smarter, and he has to learn to, and they basically just have conversations, character-driven conversations about who they are, what they are, personal life, and there's a really, really nice component between the two of them. And I really like the chemistry the two actors have on screen, the friendship that they portray. And even Helen Bonham Carter in this film is absolutely fantastic. She doesn't really get a lot of credit because she's in a lot of weird Tim Burton films, but she's a very good actress. And she nails this role for the limited screen time she has. And eventually the prince becomes the king because his brother decides that he wants to marry someone who's not a royal, and he gives up his title. And he has to deliver a wartime speech to rally the troops. And this is where this doctor comes into play. And he delivers his speech, and it's really one guy getting ready for one speech with a little bit of history based on a true story, and it's absolutely phenomenal. Their friendship is the highlight of the film, and I'm really glad this won Best Picture because it's phenomenal.
At number 5, the Best Picture winner of 1994, we have Forrest Gump. And yes, I'm serious about that. Josh is rolling his eyes as I say this exact pick, but hear me out on this. I will be the first to admit, Pulp Fiction, Shawshank Redemption, those should have won over Forrest Gump, but I still fucking love this movie. I know a lot of people give it crap for being sappy, but in my opinion, Eric Roth's adaptation of a not so classic book, because really, who actually remembers the original novels? Eric Roth takes this source material and doesn't shy away from the fact that Forrest as a character does experience a lot of different hardships, namely how he has experienced the deaths of so many loved ones to the point where it does become unbearable at points. But regardless of how much he knows, one thing he's absolutely certain of is that he has to keep living his life. He has to come up with new ways to pass the time and hopefully set a good example to others for the acts of kindness that he provides, which absolutely succeeds. And in my opinion, all the trials and tribulations that Forrest Gump goes through in order to experience life, forge bonds with others during the time that all of them have together, is legit. It feels very natural. And a lot of it comes to career best performances from Tom Hanks, Robin Wright, Gary Sinise, Sally Field, and Michael Williams, Bubba. I mean, look at how many people said no to being Bubba in Forrest Gump because they all thought that this movie was going to fail. Ice Cube said no. David Allen Greer said no. Fucking Chappelle said no. And if you ever ask him, he will openly tell you that he should have agreed to be in the movie. Robert Zemeckis has the difficult task of directing this movie through multiple different time periods in a variety of different ways with set design, costume design, and of course his need to revolutionize special effects by having Forrest in the exact same room as JFK, John Lennon, among many others, in such seamless effect shots, and he and his crew absolutely rise to the occasion. Forrest Gump is bittersweet, it's depressing, but there's always something on screen to be hopeful about. And in my opinion, as much as it may be a nostalgic guilty pleasure, I fucking love Forrest Gump.
Coming in at number 4, I wanted to put this on the list because I think this is a great technical achievement as well as a good end to a trilogy. Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. Now, this won Best Picture. I like that. I like the Lord of the Rings films. I like the Hobbit films. My favorite is definitely The Two Towers, but Return of the King is great. This, if you have not seen the Lord of the Rings, go watch them from the beginning because explaining the plot is a little complicated if you haven't seen them. But this movie has a lot of fantastic performances. It's the big finale to everything that we've been building up to. The number one highlight of the film for me is definitely Frodo and Sam's friendship, as he is the one who is, I would say, is the more ring bearer, but Frodo has it. And his friendship is literally like the most nicest thing on the planet because he never gives up on this man despite what Gollum says or how far they climb or how much betrayal. And that for me is the storyline of the film that I think made it Oscar worthy. I love the big battle sequences in here. 100%. I love watching all the people come together to fight at Mordor and to take on Sauron and the Eye. And then we get, oh my goodness, some really great battle moments weaved in throughout with pitch perfect directing from Peter Jackson. A really well written script, a great adaptation of the book. I know some people will say the book is better, but for me, I really think that the Lord of the Rings films are really probably the best book film adaptation that you're going to get out there. And there's just some great moments. Now, I like the theatrical version as opposed to extended, strictly because I don't need 12 freaking endings, but it was the theatrical that was nominated, and it has one of the most well-earned lines where you're like, yeah, that's true. You bow to no one.
Number 4, the Best Picture winner of 2007, No Country for Old Men. No coin toss necessary. No Country for Old Men might be the movie that has influenced other films and shows like Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, Justified, Logan, Let Him Go, anything that was ever made by Taylor Sheridan as a writer or director. It has that neo-Western vibe that is very prominent in today's media that doesn't really take place in the Old West, but still features a lot of stylistic traits, like settings in the American West terrain, stare-downs that lead to shootouts, and this overall feeling of living in a lawless environment where there are some things that you just can't stop, even in the presence of actual law enforcement. Josh Brolin is fantastic as a man who comes to regret taking money from a drug deal gone wrong and coming face to face with the consequences. This idea that he never should have taken the money, but at the same time he couldn't resist the temptation. His performance makes you question whether or not you would have done the exact same thing if you were in his position. Javier Bardem absolutely earns his Best Supporting Oscar as Anton Chigurh, a hitman who is absolutely convinced that the fate of others is already determined before he even meets them. And whenever any of them say, you have a choice in your own actions, he seems very frustrated. It almost feels as if he's in denial of that absolute fact. Tommy Lee Jones isn't given that much in comparison to Josh Brolin and Javier Bardem, but in my opinion, it's still the last great performance that we got out of him before he went into that resting bitch face that he's been using for the rest of his career. I don't know. I felt that his character summed up the feelings that there are some things in life that you just can't control. It's a very gloomy Western. You're not going to like every answer that the movie gives you. They're not always going to give you answers. And honestly, with a movie about the themes of fate and coincidence and how they play a part in your own life, I wouldn't have it any other way.
Coming in at number 3 for me on the Best Oscar-winning films of all time. I'm repeating myself now. Words are 4 letters long. Ben-Hur. Now, Ben-Hur is a masterpiece in its own right. Yes, it is very long. This is Charlton Heston playing a man who goes from rich man to slave to starting a revolution and basically just being a human being who's fighting for his rights. Now, this is a very old and dated film, so it obviously has a lot of these scenes, but I think these scenes work effectively in its favor as we see the scenes in the family house and the way it affects his sister and people around him, and the rivalry and the betrayal between him and the antagonist of the film. And then you get the phenomenal chariot race, you get the really awesome boat section with the phenomenal set, as well as doing all of this. Basically, this movie is probably one of the best epics of all time. I would say my brain always ties this with Lawrence of Arabia because that is a phenomenal film about sand and, finding yourself in sand. I joke, but I really do like Lawrence of Arabia. I love epics through and through. Charlton Heston's performance is really, really good in this. I think this is possibly his best performance. I do enjoy him in Planet of the Apes and the Ten Commandments and Soylent Green and such. But for me, this is the quintessential Charlton Heston performance if you were to have one. Because he gets the most fleshed out character. He gets basically to do everything an actor would want to do with a character. Take him through multiple lifetimes. And I'm really glad this won a bunch of Oscars. I don't know if it deserves 9 or 7 Oscars, I'd be happy with 1, to be honest. Because there were a lot of great movies that came out that year. So I hope we didn't snub anything. I really hope.
And number 3, Argo. Argo, fuck yourself. Argo goes back and forth between two different tones. One of a Hitchcockian thriller about 6 Americans trying to escape the Iranian hostage crisis, to this really awesome dark comedy that satirizes the film industry where a CIA agent, a makeup artist, and a film producer have to fake the production of a film in order to portray the American hostages as a Canadian film crew on a scouting location. Ben Affleck goes back and forth between these two tones by giving each of them a different film stock that puts you into the setting without a need for explanation and without ever underemphasizing the high stakes that these characters are in. He's not only good at directing himself, but he gets great performances out of John Goodman and especially Alan Arkin. The chemistry between the two of them is absolutely hilarious, and Alan Arkin steals every scene that he's in. It's no wonder that he got nominated for Best Supporting Actor for this. And Affleck's direction of the hostage crisis scenes feature a lot of gritty handheld camera work that puts you into the chaotic setting without ever relying on shaky cam or gratuitous violence of innocent lives as a way to build up suspense. Things that people who didn't like this movie honestly wanted for some reason. I don't know why the artistic license taken with this story is a huge surprise for people. We as audience members are not stupid. We know that this didn't go exactly according to plan. But the reason the movie focuses more on the fake film storyline is that honestly, it's still really far-fetched to this day that this was actually based on real-life events, and even more impressive, it's hard to believe that this stuff ever worked at all. And in my opinion, that was the story to focus on in order to balance out the humor in the situation that this was such an absurd rescue plot, but it ended up working, and the suspenseful situation that needed such a drastic rescue mission in order for it to work. What else can you say other than Argo, fuck yourself?
Coming in at my number 2 for Best Picture winners, I am putting the absolute war classic on here, Bridge on the River Kwai. This is Alec Guinness in a Japanese World War II internment camp, and him and his men basically struggling to find identity and hope. So they build this bridge to help the enemy. And this is where they have that whistling song that everyone does for camp, whether it's in the Parent Trap or they used it in Holes or whatever. That's the noting of this film here. But this film is probably one of the most interesting and most perplexing war films I've ever seen. You see Alec Guinness, you see the box, you see the way they're treated, and you see that they want a purpose, a dignity, something to strive towards. Then They offer to build a bridge because every time there's a bridge, they just keep, well, messing up the bridge because they don't want to do it. But then they say, what if we build a really good bridge, something we can be proud of? And they spend the majority of the film just building this bridge. And then there's the finale. And we'll get to that in a minute. But in the meantime, there's someone who's escaped the camp and is basically coming to scout out a bridge so the Japanese can't move supplies from camp to camp. And their job is to blow up the bridge. I think it's a Canadian team blowing up the bridge randomly. I do believe that is the case. And we basically get to a point where Alec Guinness is fighting for the enemy against people that he's supposed to be allies with to save the bridge that he built. It's phenomenal. It is incredible. It is so well done and so thought-provoking that to this day, when I think about Bridge on the River Kwai, I think about the moral implications of it, and it's incredible.
At number 2, the Best Picture winner that we are still thinking about to this day, the Best Picture winner of 2019, Parasite. This is going to be the shortest explanation on this list, because really, what can I say about Parasite that hasn't already been said? The performances are absolutely great, especially from Song Kang-ho and Choi Woo-shik. The direction by Bong Joon-ho is absolutely marvelous, featuring a lot of subtle visual cues like portraying staircases as proof of who has the power in a given scene, and also for the costume design where the rich characters all wear something white in a given scene while the poorer characters either wear black covering their white or wearing multicolored clothing to begin with. The script pulls the ultimate bait and switch of starting off as a dark comedy about a family trying to con their way into employment that turns into a thriller once the consequences of their actions come back to bite them in the ass. And that's really what makes this movie feel complex. As much as the wealthy family is arrogant and stupid to the point where you don't really feel sorry for them, they don't have to cheat their way into earning the money and power that they have. And it definitely helps that the movie doesn't actually explain what it is this family does for a living and how they got their wealth. So it's a little more ambiguous on that end. And with the poorer family, they have legit reasons for wanting to con their way into employment. They've been laid off of legitimate jobs. There is a lack of opportunities for the younger family members unless they have higher education, and they can't get higher education because it's fucking expensive. They have fleshed out motivations. But at the end of the day, they're still breaking the law. And once they've gotten what they achieved, they become greedy and start to bite off more than they can chew. Both sides have equal strengths and flaws, which is something that you don't often get with a movie that pokes fun of capitalism. But that's just one reason why Parasite is a fresh change of pace, not just for Best Picture winners, but just for movies in general.
And my number 1 is Around the World in 80 Days, starring David Niven. Now, Tyler, I know you were expecting me to put Rocky up here. But I'm going to tell you something. I don't think Rocky should have won Best Picture. I think it should have won Best Performance for Stallone, but I think overall the picture has a few flaws. Regardless, I love it. But number 1 for me is Around the World in 80 Days. David Niven basically goes to a boys' club, a men's club, and he's there, and he's all about challenges. And they challenge him. I bet you can't go around the world in 80 days. It's not possible. So he looks at his servant and says, guess what we're doing? We're going around the world in 80 days. They'll travel by plane, they'll travel by boat, they'll travel by air balloon. They will basically get there wherever they can go. And they have to be back at this club exactly at the stroke of midnight in 80 days. Now, this film offers a large variety and slice of the world, whether it is dated or not. As I have not traveled around the world, I cannot say. This offers a wonderful performance by David Niven, who I think is a phenomenal actor and has a lot of great things under his belt, including The Guns of Navarone, which is an impeccable film. If you have not seen it, highly recommend The Guns of Navarone. And the soundtrack is wonderful. It's actually one that I own on vinyl. It's over there somewhere. I love this movie from beginning to end. And he makes it around the world in 80 days after a magical journey. Now, I'm not going to describe the journey because I want you to go watch the film. Because I think this is honestly one of the best films ever made. possibly one of the best films of the 50s and 60s. It is an absolutely phenomenal travel masterpiece. It's the ultimate road movie. And if y'all are watching that piece of shit Jackie Chan remake, don't. Don't watch that movie. That's just a dumb bro comedy. It's like if American Pie made Singing in the Rain. It shouldn't happen. This is a masterpiece around the world in 80 days. Watch that movie. It's amazing.
And at number one, my absolute favorite out of all the Best Picture winners on this list, it goes to the underrated 1980 classic, Ordinary People. Out of all the Best Picture winners on this list, this is the one that made me feel the most emotion. This was the one that made me smile the most. This was the one that made me cry the most. It made me appreciate just how you can have a Best Picture winner that doesn't have fancy cinematography, doesn't have super duper complex themes that only a handful of people can easily identify with. If anything, I think it's the most relatable Best Picture winner that I've ever seen. Robert Redford, in his directorial debut, shows that he has a very understated visual style that doesn't focus, again, on elaborate camera movements or these incredibly theatrical monologues. There are monologues, there are shouting matches, and I'll get more into them later. But he features a very minimalist score that prominently features Pachelbel's canon to excellent dramatic effect, but he uses the camera in a skillful way to get the most out of the performances, which are absolutely phenomenal. Timothy Hutton, in his first movie that won him a Best Supporting Actor at the age of 20, he may still be the youngest winner of that category, is heartbreaking to watch as this one kid who is struggling to reconnect with his parents after supposedly being responsible for his older brother's death. Donald Sutherland is unbelievably restrained as he's trying to get both his son and his wife to open up about their grief. And Mary Tyler Moore is the biggest revelation as someone who's not just pretending as if everything's totally fine and they haven't lost anything, but very subtly showing nothing but contempt towards her only living son, something that he picks up on and constantly points out that leads to the family drama. And I gotta say, the shouting matches, the monologues, the speeches that each performer, each character goes through never felt like Oscar bait. It felt very natural. It felt out of left field in the best possible way. And I should also mention Judd Hirsch is also excellent as the tough love psychiatrist that most of the family goes to in order to alleviate their pain. And his uncompromising attitude towards all of them really captures the themes of how difficult it is to accept grief and why so many people go on in life without ever doing so perfectly. It's not a movie that I watch on a regular basis just because the subject matter is so effectively well done that it's almost a little too sad to watch at parts. But nevertheless, Ordinary People is still my favorite Best Picture winner of all time. It's a movie that slips under people's radar, and I really don't understand why. If you haven't seen Ordinary People, definitely check it out.
Thanks for joining us on the Josh and Tyler Show. I'm Josh, as always, and there's a random... My neck is itchy. It happens sometimes. We will be back next week with a new Josh and Tyler Show, talking about the worst trailers of all time. Thanks for joining us. Tyler, take us out.
Guys, thanks as always for watching. Thank you to Josh once again for inviting me on your channel to do this list. Let us know in the comments below what some of your favorite Best Picture winners are, and how many of our choices you have actually seen and enjoyed enough to be considered Best Picture winners. Be sure to let us know in the comments below. Be sure to stay tuned for more videos on Josh's channel and on mine as well. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.